Well, in 2016, there were huge fears. What will happen if Britain exits from the EU? What will happen if Donald Trump gets elected? And there was a double whammy. Both of them happened. There were huge fears. And the remarkable paradox right now is that stock markets are booming everywhere. Businessmen are smiling everywhere. What exactly has happened and what are the prospects for India? I would say let's go behind these two events to the background. What is it that caused Brexit and Donald Trump's election, both of which were utterly unexpected? The elephant in the room is actually falling productivity. This is not exactly new, it's been happening for some time. But I think Robert Gordon produced the best book of last year, The Rise and Fall of American Productivity, where he showed that, in the 20th century, we got an all-time boost in productivity from new inventions, especially electricity and the internal combustion engine. And it took about a century for the positive effects of these to play out. But this reached its peak in about 1972, tapered off, and then began to decline. Then there was a short burst, 1994 to 2004, the internet, the cell phone raised productivity a little. After that, once again flat and falling. And Gordon's prognosis is that productivity growth, which was about 1.7% per year, is down to 0.7% per year in America, and by implication in the whole of the West, and to some extent, I would say, even in China. At the same time, population growth has slowed substantially in the United States. The workforce growth has slowed. Whereas in places like Germany and Japan, workforce growth is shrinking, and that is soon going to happen in China as well. Now, at the end of it all, what is GDP growth? GDP growth is nothing but the sum of workers' growth and worker productivity growth. Those two added together give you GDP growth. So if the number of workers is no longer growing, and if productivity is growing much more slowly, there is a huge, deep structural thing which says the West, China, Japan, all these countries are going to be growing more slowly. It is a deep structural problem. What are the implications of this fall in productivity? Well, the stagnation of wages, as I said, was not exactly new. But there was a slight boost to productivity with the internet and cell phone in the 90s, early 2000s. Then in the West, although wages had been more or less stagnant from the 70s onwards, there was a boom in borrowing. So even if workers were not earning much more, they were able to spend much more through borrowing. So the feel-good factor was still there, and that particular bubble burst in 2008. When that bubble burst, further it became clear that far from borrowing more, you have to borrow less. The stagnancy of wages hit everybody. And on top of that, we got the emergence of these new winner-takes-all companies coming up. And the winner-takes-all companies were making absolutely enormous profits with a first-mover advantage. And while they made enormous profits and became some of the biggest companies in the world, they required very little investment and they created very few jobs. So this is what then led to worker stagnation, a disappearance of job at the lower and the middle levels, and this has ultimately sparked a voter revolt in England, in the USA, it may happen in France. But the underlying structural problems of slow workforce growth and slow productivity growth are so deep-seated that the kind of rebellion that you're seeing does not carry the seeds of a solution within it. So either in Britain or America, you are going to see more protectionism, more import curbs, more visa curbs, more trade threats of various kinds. The worst case scenario, which I don't think will happen, would be trade war. But none of these is actually going to be a solution to the problem of slow worker growth and falling productivity growth. What are the implications for India? Well, in a country like India, the scope of productivity growth is still enormous because we are still so backward compared to the rest of the world. Just by technological catch-up with the West, we have a huge scope for increasing our productivity. This is true of all emerging markets, incidentally, which is why the emerging markets do grow so much more faster than the advanced markets. So the scope for productivity growth is there. However, India is now more integrated into the global economy than ever before. According to the economic survey, there was some interesting and remarkable data which showed that international trade as a percentage of GDP more than doubled in India to a peak of about 55% of GDP in 2008. It's come down to about 40-45%. But today, that ratio is higher in India than even in China. We are more globally integrated than China, despite the notion that China is the face of globalization. So, if India is so firmly integrated in the global economy, and the global economy slows down, there is no question that India has to slow down too. There are optimists who are talking about 8% growth, 9%, 8 to 10% growth, the new normal. I would disagree. I think as long as these global headwinds continue, as long as we have the structural problems in the West, the new normal in the West is going to be much slower, and therefore the new normal in India is also going to be slower. I'm pessimistic enough to believe the new normal is probably only 6 to 7% GDP growth. This may get a little faster in a year or two and would then fall again in a year or two, as long as these global headwinds continue. And I see no sign of those global headwinds coming down in the immediate future. I think they'll blow quite hard for some years to come. What is the kind of evidence that we are seeing of what's happening in India? There are various people who will tell you that India is in a sweet spot. Why is India in a sweet spot? Number one, everybody talks about the demographic dividend. At a time when Western workforces are falling, Indian workforce is still increasing. And in fact, we are going to have a record addition of up to 200 million workers in the next 2 decades, at a time when the Chinese workforce is going to level off and fall. So India has the kind of double whammy advantage, rising productivity because of catch-up, as well as one of the few countries to have a really large rising workforce. The ratio of workers to dependents in China, I think, peaked at about 2.6, and in Korea at about 2. The economic survey predicts that in India it will probably peak at 1.6. But still, having peaked would fall very slowly. And so we would have a huge advantage for a longish time in terms of our workforce expansion. The one dark spot in the supposed sweet spot is that if you actually look at what's happening, the number of people in the working age is shooting upward, and yet the absolute number of workforce participation is not rising, in fact is falling. The main reason is females are withdrawing massively from the workforce. You get different data depending on which source you look at. If you look at the ILO data, it shows a decline of almost 11 percentage points of female withdrawal from the workforce, which means 60 million women have withdrawn from the workforce. That is more than the entire number of women in all but 2 or 3 countries. So there's a very massive, so we are not getting the demographic dividend. The number of people in the working age has gone up, but the number of actual workers is not going up. If you study it in further detail, for both boys and girls, it seems that a much larger proportion of them are in education. More are in school and more are in college. So hopefully we can say that, okay, the demographic dividend is going to be delayed by 10 years, 15 years, but it will be a dividend with a more educated workforce, and that's positive. However, the more deep-seated reason for falling female participation appears to be one of social status. Man does not live by money alone. Social status and dignity matters. And what happens is that working class women always went out to work, especially in rural areas. But the moment you go from the working class to the lower middle class, the great boast is, I do not send my girls out to work. There is a withdrawal of women massively from the workforce as incomes rise and people go from the working class to the lower middle class. And even among the lower classes, I mean, the Dalit Professor Chandrabhan Prasad told me, he says, among Dalits now, a new situation is that if a marriage proposal comes, a groom is looking for a bride, one of the first questions they now ask is, do the women of your work go out to work? And if you say yes, you get a lower quality of husband. And if you say no, you get a higher quality of husband. So literally withdrawing from the workforce actually helps even socially in getting a better quality of husband and even translating into economic uh, advantages. So it seems that, the illiterates, women work, the moment the living standards rise, their participation falls. But then after they rise further and get college degrees, they re-enter the workforce. This can be a gap of 20, 30 years. So it may be that our demographic dividend gets postponed quite a bit. I would also add that in theory, a more educated workforce is a positive dividend for us, but the quality of our graduates is so pathetic. A large number of employers saying that, I interview any number of people and I have to reject 90% of them. The degrees are completely useless. There is a deep problem in the quality of our education, which has to be overcome. Nevertheless, as I said, there are all these bright spots, and we can be optimistic in saying we are going to do quite well. But it may well be that at 6 to 7% growth, we are the fastest growing country among all major economies. So in other words, there is no contradiction by saying that, our prospects are good compared to other countries. And that, however, we may not grow at more than 6 to 8%. What about the specifics of Brexit and Trump? Brexit is not going to be a serious thing in changing economic relations with India. A lot of the problems there about immigration from East Europeans, which shouldn't affect us seriously in any way. As far as the United States is concerned, I think definitely something will have to be done by Mr. Trump after all that he has said. So I would think that there will definitely be a tightening of the visa regime. I think there may be tightening of various things on pharmaceuticals. If he has kind of price controls on the imported generic, for instance, that would adversely affect you. If he tightens up IPR rules in general, it would affect you. He may well demand that India reduce its agricultural tariff barriers, which are extremely high. So, there are a number of areas where you can see problems between India and the USA. If he says that, companies have to stop investing abroad and come back to the USA. Now, the ability of an American president to force companies to do this is very limited. But what is true is that if he changes the tax regime to make it possible to come back, yes, it is possible that a number of companies that have set up shop abroad, part of that business may return to the USA. So in all these areas, there is some scope for negative effects on India. And yet, in themselves, none of these is dramatic. Bigger things that he has said, like huge tariff increases. You can't do tariff increases against just China or against Mexico if you're a member of WTO. It's against the rules to have selective things. You can take up anti-dumping duties, yes, but not selective taxes just on these fellows. What can be done is what they call a border tax adjustment. This is an idea of Paul Ryan, the Speaker in the House, not directly connected with Trump, although it's consistent with. They want to lower American corporate taxes very sharply. 35% is a very high rate. They want to cut it to 20, maybe even 15%, and make up that revenue by what they call a border adjustment tax. So in that border adjustment tax, a large number of items currently deductible for tax purposes will not be allowed, including imports. This is to the extent anybody has an import component, which today is allowed as a cost. Future, it will not be allowed as a cost, whereas if you're buying an American product, it's allowed as a cost. This would make a huge difference. This would have the effect, in fact, of being a big tariff on imports without actually violating WTO rules. So this is the kind of idea they're thinking about with. And this has sent a certain amount of shock waves around. However, a very large number of American companies will be adversely affected by this too. All the American retailers would be very badly affected if they were suddenly told you can't deduct your import costs, because they are massive importers of goods. I mean, Walmart is one of the biggest companies in the world, maybe the biggest right now. And Walmart is hugely, hugely dependent on imported goods. So Walmart will be a very, very big lobbyist against this kind of tax, or at least against the inclusion of these kinds of details within that particular tax. A very large number of other people are going to complain. A large amount of what is called American industry is actually people who are assembling things out of imported components. So I said, the idea that there's going to be a huge impact because American companies will be delighted with Trump's ideas. No, for every company that will be delighted with the border tax, a large number of other companies are going to be adversely affected. The net result might be more complicated and less damaging than many of us are fearing. It also needs to be added that the makers of the American Constitution deliberately engineered it to make sure that the president is not a powerful person. This is not widely understood. Mr. Trump may say what he likes, but in America, the legislature and the judiciary regards itself fully on level with the president. They don't take orders and will fight back on any and every issue. So you had Mr. Trump's travel ban on certain number of countries. The judiciary immediately came and stopped it. In India, it would be difficult to imagine a sessions court challenging an order of Narendra Modi. In America, it will happen. And Trump has had to roll it back. So I said, Trump, besides, for a very large number of Trump's ideas, you will require fresh legislation in Congress. And the US Congress, again, by design, is a body afflicted by gridlock. Any new bill is brought in, and some bills have been brought in which are going to raise the minimum software engineer payment to $130,000 per year. And people are afraid of that. And yet the fact is that 90% of bills never see the light of day in the American system. It will be introduced in one house, so let's say House of Representatives. It has then to go before the appropriate committee. If the committee chairman doesn't like it, it just won't make any progress. If he likes it enough, it still has to go through. Once it's gone through, a similar bill will then have to be done in the Senate, where there are different committee chairmen with different ideas, and then you will end up with two different kinds of bills in the Senate and House, and it has to go for reconciliation. That reconciliation process can go on for years, and sometimes does not come to an end. There are some studies which show of the average bill that passes both houses of Congress and becomes law, the average bill takes 6 years from introduction to final passage. So, the idea that huge dramatic changes are going to take place, in some areas where the president has executive authority, it can happen. Wherever it requires legislative change, it may take several years. So, the House is not going to fall down immediately. But our main problem, therefore, is not going to be just the fact that Mr. Trump has come and he has certain ideas. The main problem is that one of falling productivity and falling or stagnant workforce growth in the West. So that is going to drag down global growth. That is going to affect us. We will still survive. We can still do reasonably well. We can still do better than anybody else in the world, but the best may only be 6 to 7%. Thank you. I'm happy to take questions.
Mr. Trump's agenda is perhaps the fallout on the international order also, because so far we've seen US leading a bloc of Western capitalist democratic countries behind it. We've seen others, which is Russia and China, and not together, some other people aligning around them. But now with Trump supposedly being very hostile to leaders of many other Western democracies, and telling them that next time there's a war, you pick up the tab, I'm not coming to your defense, and so on. And, being abrasive, breaking relations with, supposedly had a very bad conversation with the Australian Prime Minister. All this change in the international order, do you think these are going to break partnerships? We will have a new world order where, in fact, we might look at a closer cooperation with, let's say, China. Australia is talking about a closer cooperation with China, which is not,
Well, I said the problem with Trump is that he says different things every day. He certainly has a lot of power on foreign affairs. There he is not dependent on Congress.
Yes.
And there he can make broad changes, but he says different things different days. One day he makes a telephone call to Nawaz Sharif and the Pakistan goes ecstatic. Then he makes a phone call to Modi and people get ecstatic. I would warn against making jumping to any firm conclusion of what is going to happen. He certainly is going to rework his relationships. We have to be alert and nimble to see to what extent we can use the new opportunities and to what extent we can check the new threats. Certainly, he appears to be becoming more isolationist. He'd be much more unlikely, I would think, to go into the South China Sea than his predecessors. He does not want to get involved in foreign military things. He would rather use foreign economic things. So these are the kind of things. We might have to realign ourselves, saying that on certain issues, if American protectionism becomes an issue, we have to find new allies. We can't take him on our own. So can you ally yourself with Europe on certain issues, with Japan on certain issues, or even with China and the rest of it, the Asian countries on different issues. So yes, there can be a realignment strategically thinking on various places.
You talked about the quality of education. So a number of other people, the sad quality of education in India, right? You talked about how the graduates are not really up to the mark. So do you foresee anything happening in that regard? Is there a will? Do you see anything happening over the next few years that can change that?
Not in the next 2 years, no. A certain number of private universities are coming up of high quality. Far more is completely useless private engineering colleges of all kinds. When I visited Bhopal, I was told 100 engineering colleges have come up in Bhopal. I said, my God, where are the teachers? Where is the staff? Just because Bharat Heavy Electricals is there, it used to be said one point of time that half of Indian engineers are unemployable. Now I am told that more like 3/4 are unemployable because we are producing very low quality guys. The silver lining is that if the total number of guys per year is now, there was a time when the IITs and regional engineering colleges had only 45,000 seats per year. With the private colleges, it had gone up to 4 lakh. And at that time, the software, everything took off. Today, the number of seats is 1.5 million. Nowhere in the world are there so many engineering seats. So, even they are not all getting filled. But suppose out of 1.2 million, if a quarter are usable, quarter of that is still 3 lakh people. I mean, it is a phenomenally large number of employable engineers. So that is the silver lining. Even with all that wastage, in absolute numbers, we are producing so many of these guys. This is why every Fortune 500 company has to come to India. The skills are here, the brains are here. And it's a steady, non-stop flow. I remember asking way back in the year 2000, I was asking Michael Clark, who was the head of the Indo-US Chamber of Commerce. I said, why is Ford and why is everybody going to Tamil Nadu in the auto industry? Historically, the only thing they had was a bankrupt company called Standard Motors. So why are all the auto fellows going to Madras? He said, I'll check and let you know. He checked and the answer was, there appears to be an unending flow of quality engineers out of Tamil Nadu. So that was his particular explanation. Bangalore itself, how did Bangalore arise? Bangalore arose because on one single day, Devraj Urs back in the 1980s gave approval of 22 private universities in one go. So there was a time when there was the limited number, so some quality institutions have arisen. We must not tar everything with the same brush. All I can say is in absolute numbers, we are having a very large number of employable, decent people. The problem is you have so many people who are unemployable. Those guys are now agitating for job reservation or something or the other. So just as we have the worker revolt in the West, saying we need more jobs, here you find that Mr. Hardik Patel in Gujarat is able to attract larger crowds than any politician in Gujarat. Amazing. Young fellow with no backing. First people thought he must have some backing somewhere. They said, no, he has the backing. The Jats in Haryana, the Gujars, the Marathas in Maharashtra, the Ahoms, these were dominant rural castes. Once upon a time, they dominated. Now they say there's no future in agriculture. And in the private sector, China is producing everything. And on top of that, a very large number of them have completely useless degrees. That is the part they don't emphasize. So they've all gone up in rural areas. They've all got useless degrees. They all believe I must be an officer. I'm not going to be a worker. So you have on the other hand companies complaining that they cannot get quality workers. The skills are not there. And all the college graduates saying there are no jobs. This is this huge skill mismatch. There is no short-term fix to it at all. There is a national skill development corporation the government has set up. That program is progressing very, very slowly. A small apprenticeship system is coming up, but it is still not going to get rid of the problem of millions of unemployment graduates coming on the market every year. Can you take a microphone?
So we are in a financial advisory, and so many times we are very much impressed about your Swaminomics. I just want to say, having the idea from you, that there are a very financial illiteracy in the market, and we are trying our level best. So what particular suggestion you want to give if we want to develop the financial literacy through media and through advisory?
Well, I would say you are doing your bit and I am doing my bit, but ultimately what is going to do it is coming savings glut. As you grow, I mean, you saw what happened in China. As they grew fast, the savings rose. And the savings on a large base really add up. Even the savings rate falls from a peak of 37 to 30%. As the base grows, that's a huge amount of savings. There is a limit to how much you can keep putting into real estate and gold. So willy-nilly, some has to come into the financial sector. So it's happening not because you are very persuasive and I am very persuasive. It is the sheer glut. Where will the money go? And when inflation was high, people said put in a fixed deposit. Now that the fixed deposit rates are coming down and down and down, everybody is saying, where do I put my money? So frankly, there is a savings glut. I need to add that this is part of a global phenomenon. I said, these are particular circumstances, but even in the West, globally, you have a situation where there appears to be a savings glut. There are huge amounts of money chasing a limited number of areas. What's happened is that because of slowing productivity and slowing growth, the number of investment opportunities which are good and profitable have come down. So there are not enough investment opportunities to match the normal savings. On top of that, the most profitable companies are turning out to be fellows like Apple and Google and Facebook who require no investment. These guys are all sitting on cash piles. I mean, the cash piles in these surplus companies are trillions of dollars. In India, your Infosys, TCS, everybody is being forced to return money saying, we're sitting on cash piles. The people who need investment, steel and so on, nobody wants to, thank you very much. So, we've got a change in the productivity structure, which is leading a number of theorists to now say that the world is going to have a structural savings glut. And this savings glut is going to drive more and more money into financial assets or maybe real estate and will create bubbles which will burst and people will weep and scream. But at the end of it all, the money will come back because it has nowhere else to go. Martin Wolf, a very respected economics editor of the Financial Times, he firmly believes that there is a structural savings glut. It is here to stay. It started in some sense with China, but it's a growing feature of all economies. And if that is the case, you gentlemen are very well placed.